So this is lecture 3 of the series of short lectures on chapter 8, DHCP. All right, so we're going to continue with lesson 3 or video 3. And remember last time we went through the addressing in the first one, the idea of the landlord and the tenant, the leasing arrangements, the kinds of things that could be negotiated. And then we did some configuration of the server using the router as a server. And we talked just a little bit about the relay mode and how that needs to get set up. So I just wanted to mention this slide you saw. You set up relay largely through the use of the helper address. And there was a small piece I wanted to point out to you in your text. You have this simple chart of port addresses for other services that the helper can help with. And you can notice down here they have it correct. This is the way you see it documented every place. The server from the old boot protocol is always 67. The client is 68. Okay, so I just wanted to say, they noticed that. I don't know what was going on with the earlier one, and until I get to do a physical setup and see what really happens there, I can't check those out. All right. Now, to set up the router as the client. So we're done with the server side of this for now. And to set up the router as a client, here's just two routers. So the ISP is going to be the server, or somewhere from there is going to come the service. And this is the way it is, by the way, in your own home for home network. So you see the SOHO really means small office, home office. And the simple setup of it is just, once again, set up the interface. So this is on G01. Set up the interface. And all you're simply doing is saying IP address, going to get it as DHCP. This would be the same command you'd issue if you were going to attach an actual address here. IP address 192.168.10.4 with a mask 255.255.255.0. It's the same command, only now you're calling out DHCP, and then you're turning it on. You're saying, I want no shutdown, right? So when that happens, automatically the router does this. You've seen this. You've seen it interrupt your command line interface work before, where it tells you here's a change of state coming. All right, I'm going to assign this interface, gigabit 00, this address. This is the response coming from the ISP. So now interface G01, instead of you giving it the address, the ISP here is giving it the address, and this is the address that it's given it, and the mask. Okay, so a pretty tight mask, 224. There's only a few other addresses in that mask, and it's chosen to give it address 12. Okay, now if you bail out at that point and go all the way back to privileged exec, not config, but just privileged exec, use the show IP command for that interface, and you will see exactly that. Here's what it did. It configured that address. Notice the mask is size 27, right? So there's still 5 bits left. So what is 5 bits? There's 32 addresses laying around out there. The ISP has those 32 addresses. So the ISP went into its address pool for DHCP, and it picked this one, 12, right here. It picked that address for the pool and said, give him that one. Here's your broadcast address, because now you need a broadcast address, and it tells So you looking at it, the administrator, this was obtained by DHCP. So this is all simply the execution of the enabling of DHCP on a router, right? You do the very same thing in your host when you go to the Microsoft page and go work your way down into the network, your network stuff on your home computer, and you click the button for DHCP, for automatic address. Basically, you're doing this same setup, these same couple of commands or something like it is happening in your host. And in fact, an example of that is right here. If you have a home router, probably most of us do at this point now, and they typically come, you get these at Costco, any place, Walmart. You get a home router of whatever level you're going to get. This is one from Linksys. This is kind of what their page looks like. At home, I use Netgear, and but they look very similar. And you can see right here, you get a pull down menu, and one of the pull downs allows you to choose DHCP. Well, for most home routers, this is the default. Only old ones are going to be of this vintage. Only old ones are going to be start with a static address, because that's too complicated. People got lost with all of that, and equipment didn't, the sale didn't hold because people couldn't set it up. So this is the auto config, and this is pretty much the default configuration. But I'm telling you, you can go in at home, click this button, and change into static configuration, and you can go fix addresses on your home equipment. But you have to know you've got addresses that can be that belong in the pool and that you're allowed to use. Okay, or you can go set up your own home network, your own local network on another port. But this is the one that's attaching to the ISP, right? If we go back here, if you're here, this is you at home, small office, home office. You're looking at this port going to the ISP. If you want to do something more down here with other ports, GOO, and that, you're free to do that, okay? So take a look at that sometime at home if you've got this sort of setup. Usually you have to go in through the network, give it a network address that the instructions for the router tell you to do, and then you get into a setup page just like this. It behaves very much like, okay, this is how you get into your command line interface, and you need your passwords and so forth, just like you do for privileged exec, executive, and then privileged exec. You get in, and you take a look. It's worth looking around in there. Let's take a few moments with troubleshooting tasks. There's a procedure list. Do it step by step. Kind of take them in order, and you do want to do this in order, but some of these are going to go as couplets. Okay, so the first task is resolve address conflicts. Now you say, well, wait a minute, DHCP, isn't that the server's job to resolve the conflicts? But leases may have expired, and you don't know exactly what might have transpired there. So these can come up in the form of simple conflicts. Maybe the lease expired and the address was reassigned, and the local unit that you're checking out hasn't caught up, and it still is holding on to an old address. So that's fairly simple. You can resolve the conflict kind of straightforward. Then you want to verify the physical connectivity, right? You want to use the command show IP interfaces. So notice how this starts. This starts soft. Just look for address conflicts. Then it says, oh, take a look at physical connectivity. Show that the interfaces are there. Okay? And one way you can do this is test them with static IP addresses. In other words, you got to get in and grub around a little bit more and go change the addresses and make sure that the physical connections are there. And you'll get this by plugging in static addresses. In other words, you take over management of the network. You can verify switch port connectivity, forcing a request. And what do I mean by that? It's like you can manually force a DHCP address request. I mean, maybe something's going on with the router itself, with the server itself on the other end. But you're on your end trying to say, "Oh, am I getting one?" Well, you want to force a request. And then finally you can test from the same subnet or VLAN. Go somewhere else in your network and do the same things. In other words, I think task 5 is this is a good general idea. If my direct line from my host, my client, to the server doesn't produce a write, go to another one. Isn't this what we do in class when you turn to your neighbor and say, "Hey, did you get that? Did you get that download? Did that work for you? What happened there? I can't get that download to work." Okay? This is really just that in action. Okay. So now again, in terms of verifying, you want to verify relay and services. You're back to what we should be good at or getting good at this point. Go back to show the running config. I mean, sometimes I just start out here because it gives me the global picture and I can look for, are there any, just roughly, are there any things missing or any things that are here that I don't want to be here? Then you can narrow it down to just look at one section, the interface for G00. You can include, is there anything happening? Are there no service requests going on? Now here it got no answer. So apparently service is up, but we don't know in what style. So it's all looking in deeper and deeper. That's what's going on. All right. Now, finally, here's a little combo thing you can use. I've been talking about the UDP ports 67 and 68. So using the debug command, but you can see already right at the top, the debug command doesn't show up. So the little trick that's going to be played here is before I use the debug command, I'm going to create an access list. And you need to know this is going to be a temporary access list totally for the purpose of testing. Now we did access list, but you haven't seen this kind of an access list. This is the extended access list that we talked about. We just did standard ACLs. But an extended access list allows you to specify a whole lot more. The port originating, details about it, the type of port information being passed, and this any, we're familiar with anything coming or going, but it's got to be UDP types going through this port. So you think, well, but those ports are dedicated. Yeah, but what if they're misused someplace? Okay. So you're going to first of all, you set up this little ACL. That's in config mode, right? It's not port, it's port enabled. So ports are where? They're in layer 4. You're talking about layer 4s. Ports are there. So now you take a look. Now you back out to privileged exec, get out of config mode, and you run the debug command looking for packet 100. You're just verifying, did I set up that access list? Did this actually get built? And yes, here it is. Okay? So now I'm going to debug based on that. So the extended ACL, I just make it as a note down here with this debug IP packet, point of this is you've set up a pseudo situation where you're only looking at DHCP4 packet messages, and by including both ports 67 and 68, you're looking for both the server and the client activities. Okay? Now, finally, you just run the debug DHCP server events, right? This is just another, debug IP, only here you look to see the packet. Here you look to say, now I want to run it for DHCP, and I want to see the server events. And here it lists them all, right? It returned 192.168.10.11, was in that address pool, LAN pool. Remember, we did this in the previous talk. And then it was assigned IP address 1012. That's the one that happened earlier, a couple of slides ago here. The MAC address. So here you're seeing all the details. Any expired leases? Oh, here's the problem. The lease for address 1010 expired. Okay, it expired. So it returned lease 1010 to the address pool. It's telling you exactly what happened. Now, all of these came out of the fact that I could look at both sides. I sent messages. I sort of sent out a DHCP server request and watched the activity coming through these two ports. Okay, so that's just a little troubleshooting trick, but it's one that's very helpful and very useful here. So this is it for video 4, and we'll move on to DHCP 6, version 6 next time. Thanks.